hello everyone in the background. I'm Jack. So I think Emma will, kind of dive in now and kind of give us a full introduction. So, but it's great to speak to everyone today.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm going to get started. So for everyone that's just joined us, welcome to our third Fashion in the Tea webinar. It's called How to Make a Positive Impact on the Planet from Within the Fashion Industry. And as Jack just said, he is my special guest today. Before we start, I just want to mention that everyone listening, aside from myself and Jack, are on mute, just so everyone can hear us clearly without any other background noise. If you have any questions for us, just type them in the group chat and we'll be going through all the answers at the end. So firstly, I want to say a huge welcome to anyone who's new to these webinars, and a huge welcome back again to anyone that attended the previous ones. If you haven't heard of us before, Fashion in the Free is a platform I created earlier this year to give the real people in the fashion industry a voice to share their stories, their knowledge and their expertise in the hope that it educates other professionals and students. You can check out the website at fashioninthefree.com if you haven't already. And then just to avoid any confusion, the webinar series is called Fashion in the Tea, so it's a spin-off to the main platform. So let's get right to it. In case anyone doesn't know, I'm Emma, founder of Fashion in the Free, and I'm also joined by Jack Maden-Wilkinson, who's the founder of DUCO, an environmentally conscious design company. So Jack will explain a little bit further about that shortly. Originally from the UK, Jack is now based in Sweden, and we actually also know each other because we went to uni together. So Jack has been a graphic designer in the fashion industry for almost 10 years. He's had an extremely impressive career designing for leading sportswear brands, including Adidas and Puma. And he also did an article with us back in June, which I'm going to add all the links at the end, just for the article and for his website as well for you to check out. So hi, Jack. Thank you for joining us all the way from Sweden.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I would love for you to share with everyone a little bit more about your background in fashion prior to starting DUCO and really the reasons why you ended up branching out on your own.
Yeah, so, I kind of started my initial design and artist career, as a lot of people do. You go to art school and you then go on to college and university. I actually went to university to study fashion design, not kind of graphic design. But within this there was different modules around print design, around kind of branding and coming up with slogans and, different embellishment for garments. It's when I kind of left university that I kind of took my first job, actually as an apparel designer. So it was kind of working for kind of an outdoor sports brand within the UK market. And I kind of realized quite fast that actually, in terms of creativity, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I think you leave university and you have these ideas of, you look a lot at runways and you look at a lot at really eccentric design, and actually commercial fashion is very different. So I soon started, in this kind of commercial design career to start experiment and kind of try and fulfill my kind of creative needs in different ways. And I kind of started to self-teach myself graphics, from the graphic designers within the business, but then also kind of studying on the side as well. And then this kind of led for a full-time graphic role, which I kind of did as a maternity cover, which was at first a bit of a risk to kind of take this, to kind of step outside, what I was kind of really taught in. But I found that I adapted quite well and then kind of took off into this role. And then I kind of took another role within the UK after doing this for 1 year for the maternity cover, where I was kind of heading up boyswear graphics for what in England is called George, and to the Americans it's part of Walmart Group. So this was kind of a really fun job, very much working at a value chain level. But it was kind of, from a creative standpoint, it was very fulfilling in terms of there was a lot of work on the computer, a lot of hand painting, a lot of hand drawing. And it was a really kind of fun way to kind of experiment and kind of get those kind of artistic skills through. So after doing this for 2.5 years, I was approached by Adidas, and then I moved to Germany. And this for me was kind of, first of all, it's a very culturally very different, kind of going from England to Germany. You know, there's a huge language barrier. It's a much bigger company. You know, the responsibilities were much larger. And I kind of worked there for 3.5 years. In this period, I got to work on some really amazing projects, you know, from Mickey Mouse and doing all these collaborations with Marvel and Parley for the Oceans. And then after the 3.5 years, I was approached by Puma to kind of lead the graphic design for what is called their sports style. And this is kind of everything from what you would see in a Foot Locker and, you know, a high street level to kind of the collaboration. So, you know, if you think of Rihanna and all these different celebrities who do these ranges with Puma, it would be kind of handling the design aspect from them. So I did this for 18 months, and then I kind of decided that now was the time to kind of branch on my own, and that's when kind of DUCO started 9 months ago.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I mean, I think it's really important and relevant right now to discuss, you know, how, you know, like morals and sustainability and social impact have affected like many of our career choices, as it did, you know, with you. I mean, obviously for you it did when you decided to leave. I know that was one of the reasons that have motivated you to move on. And I think it's great, you know, people able to use those choices in a positive way to start their own companies, which we'll talk about in more detail. I mean, firstly, I'd really love to know, like, when it became clear for you that things needed to change, you know, within the fashion industry, and when it started to really impact on your morals and feelings about the way things were working.
Yeah. I think for me, there was quite a defining moment. I think, you know, after I'd worked at Adidas for 1.5 years, I got the opportunity to work on Parley for the Oceans. Now, before this, you know, I was kind of always into buying lots of clothes. You know, I was always kind of, you know, wow, these new brands and this new gear and these trends. And then really kind of getting my teeth into this project, I kind of really started to reflect on the damage that I was doing and the kind of this consumeristic life I was living, and it was very much driven by ego. And actually, when you really started to look at, you know, plastic and ocean plastic as a problem, and then you start to understand how your daily choices really impact that as well, it kind of, for me, it kind of then started to, you know, plant a seed and kind of a consideration of what I wanted, you know, the work that I did to mean, and kind of the journey that, you know, I wanted to go on with it.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, I think, you know, for a lot of people in the industry right now, I think they're kind of seeing the same thing, like like you said, it's kind of almost like planted a seed. And I think there's a lot of people out there that, you know, feeling the same way. And something that's, I think, is really important is, I think, you know, right now, especially in the fashion industry, the market's a little bit crazy. Some people are out of work. Obviously, there's a lot of people job hunting and all applying for the same jobs. And there's a lot of people this year, I think, that have been trying to like really rethink what is the right path for them. And I definitely think things like sustainability have really come to the forefront of people like trying to make decisions, like trying to navigate a new pathway for themselves in the industry. So one thing like I'm going to talk to you about next is really like, you know, if you want to stay in the industry, you know, you really love what you're doing, but you want to try and make a more, you know, positive impact, you know, how can you do that from within the industry? So, you know, someone like you or me that's worked in the high street, you know, we know that there's a lot of waste. There's so many things that need to be improved. And I think the biggest question on so many people's minds is how can they make a difference if they want to stick to that industry, if they, you know, want to use their skill set, but in a more beneficial, positive way. So yeah, I guess my question to you is like, how do you think, like, what ways do you think you can create positive change from within the industry? And I know you've given me some really good advice before from when I've talked to you before, so I'd love to kind of almost for you to like tell everybody else some of the things you've told me before and like how you've done that.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's really tough. I think, you know, the whole kind of life you brought up in very much in a Western environment where, you know, success is often judged by the more things you have. You know, it means you're more successful, the bigger house, the bigger car. and, you know, it's kind of the whole life you go through this process, and, you know, it's all about having more things. And it's kind of really difficult, first of all, to start to detach from this idea. One thing, you know, I think everyone kind of, you know, doesn't really realize is that everyone can kind of make a change. And, you know, it can be a huge change, it can be a little change. And I think a lot of the time, you know, we always think, oh, you know, I'm one person in 7 billion, you know, I can't do so much. But I think when you start to open your ideas and, you know, really think, you know, I can make a lot of change just by, you know, impacting the things you do on a day-to-day basis, or, you know, creating your own thing and kind of changing things in terms of a company. But I think when you work, you know, especially in the fashion industry, there's a lot of things you can do, you know, and I think one thing for me is it's always kind of consider every detail. You know, if you look at a lot of clothes in terms of, you know, the fabrication, the print techniques, the labeling, how the labels are attached, you know, even how they're shipped from, you know, the place where they're made to actually the retail stores, you can really start to look at every single element and then really reduce everything in this process. You know, if you take away the plastic gimbals from the hang tags, these are like small things that you can do, which kind of, when added up, start to make a big difference. One thing that they did at Adidas a lot is kind of they made the whole head office completely plastic free. So, you know, you couldn't get plastic water bottles, you couldn't get, you know, everything was glass. You know, there was no plastic cutlery, it was a completely plastic free zone. And then when I went to Puma, they really started to trial different things. So, you know, they would say, okay, on Monday, we're going to do a meat-free day. We're going to provide, you know, endorsements for you to take public transport instead of, you know, driving your own car. There was all these different things, when kind of added up together, they start to make a much bigger change. You know, even to the point that Adidas and Puma, where they were starting to keep bees on the roof, and it was, you know, all the vehicles were becoming electric, and, you know, it's this very much dream scenario, but it's changing those things that you can affect to a more positive outcome.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think that, you know, from my experience too, like the hardest thing to do is, I think the easiest thing to do, like you said, is making the small changes because they all add up into a big way. I think the hardest thing is always trying to convince the powers that be that, you know, we're going to make them money from this. And I always think that's the hardest thing. I know that you worked hard on that, you know, your other company.
I think one of the main things that, you know, I learned quite fast is, at the end of the day, a lot of these companies, you know, the big kind of companies on the stock market, they're very much driven by business and growth. You know, sometimes they want to grow in terms of sales, sometimes they want to grow in terms of revenue. So when you kind of come up with these concepts, you know, a lot of the time, first of all, give the concept visualization. So, you know, you could say, oh, I'm going to do something around ocean plastic, start to kind of communicate how this could look for them. And then I think the way to present it is actually as an opportunity from a business perspective. You know, if you do this, as well as kind of bring in your positive PR and, you know, the marketing standpoint, it will also kind of deliver you this revenue. And, you know, I think it's kind of selling things to a business market so they can understand that it's an opportunity and it's not necessarily, you know, a tick box. You know, it's more of a seeing it as an opportunity for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, with everything that's been going on like this year as well, I think, you know, trying to encourage transparency within a company is so important right now. And, you know, all this, you know, a lot of the greenwashing that's been happening, you know, people need to just kind of nip that in the bud really, and really stand for what they believe in. And I think it's hard because I do think a lot of like designers especially like feel like it falls on their shoulders.
Yeah, and I think the main thing for me, like one of the things I learned is when you really start to look in, when companies talk about sustainability, they're kind of looking at it in terms of their sustaining business, their sustaining growth, and it's also kind of the environmental standpoint. One thing that I kind of like to say, instead of sustainability, it's much more of a responsibility. It's about doing things for the right reason, and it's not always about sustaining, you know, growth, money, business. You know, and I think also the key is to be transparent. You know, a lot of companies come across and say, you know, this t-shirt's better for the planet, and when you really start to investigate it, you know, you see a lot of flaws in what they're trying to say. I think the key for companies is to come out and say, you know, we're not perfect. We're trying to make a difference. We're trying to improve these different scenarios. You know, come with us on the journey, improve with us, help us where you can, give us feedback. You know, what would you like to see? And kind of create this community of change makers, you know, who will support your brand and support the transition, you know, to a better product. But I think honesty is definitely the key in these situations.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other thing I kind of wanted to add to that, you mentioned about, just even doing small things within the office. I know that something I struggled at even at my last company was, you'd see all this fabric waste, and it's actually really hard to know what to do with that. And I've actually spoken to other companies about things like that. And, it's not as easy as you think. You do have to put that extra effort in to figure out ways of making things more eco-friendly. And even just when I was trying to recycle fabrics at our office, I only found one place in the US that did that, and it was all the way in New York. So it's hard when you have like limited resources, especially somewhere like the US, where I don't necessarily believe they're geared up for a lot of this.
Yeah, I think maybe it's trying to obviously see these, what people class as waste materials, actually as having value. If you think about fabric scraps and swatches, a lot of in the kind of the furniture industry, they start to use this as kind of cushioning material. So there is different ways that you can use it, and whether it's for sampling or workshops or these different ideas, it's about kind of giving things a second life. Instead of just automatically, putting it in landfill or in the bin.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess like one thing just to add to that as well before we move on to the next question is, there are ways in which we can better educate ourselves outside of the workplace. There are tons of free courses online these days as well. I mean, I've taken two via a website called Future Learn, and they had a free London College of Fashion sustainability course on there, and Fashion Revolution also did one as well. So do you think there are ways that, if you're not potentially learning as much as you'd like to within your job or within your career in this area, there's definitely like ways to do that really come at no cost as well. So I think that's really important for people that are really interested in that as well as another option. And then you can come into work, equipped, I should say, with the tools to make some moves in the workplace, for sure.
I think one of the things I kind of, learn, I think just connect with people as well and start to have conversations. I think, if you say, I don't really know, can we work together? Everyone kind of has their speciality. Mine might be designing a company. Someone might have trained in, sustainability directly. Someone might have trained in manufacturing techniques. So it's only kind of through these conversations that you can actually, fuse ideas and start to work on really improving the process. I definitely think, collaboration is the key to kind of moving things forward.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So the next question I've got for you is, what are the ways in which businesses can improve their fashion footprint? And when I say that, I mean all the ways in which like the fashion industry, which they currently like negatively impact the planet, whether that's water consumption, carbon footprint, inventory, and waste. What ways do you think they can improve that, just from your experience so far?
Yeah, I think every case you kind of have to look at case by case. So, for footwear, Nike have already come out and start looking at, using recycled materials. You can start to impact things, by using no dye. This is kind of more to do with leather materials. You can step away from leather completely, knowing that obviously this has a high emission rate from the cows. There's very different things you can do, and I think it's kind of looking at each different business area and how you can affect that. It obviously helps if the company kind of outlines key policies. But I think what you can try and do from your kind of position that you work in is start asking, your manager or your director these questions, and bringing ideas to the table. And I think if you can try and make a business case for it as well, it's always very helpful.
Yeah, and then one thing I kind of want to add to that as well is, I know obviously this year is probably impossible, But normally things like factory visits are really invaluable for, you know, someone in design or just anyone in the fashion business, because you're going to these places and you're seeing firsthand, you know, what exactly is involved in the process to create that garment you designed, for example. So, you know, even from places, you know, when I've gone to factories, it's really been quite eye-opening to see the amount of water waste, to see the polluted water systems, to, you know, look at people that are working in these environments that aren't wearing masks, they have no way of protecting themselves from, you know, toxic fumes, things like that. And so I do think, you know, it's easier said than done, but I think if you're working within the industry like that and you have the opportunity to go to these places firsthand, you really have to, it's almost like seeing is believing. And there's obviously lots of documentaries out there that are amazing that really give you that insight, but I don't think there's anything like being there firsthand, inhaling like the toxic fumes and everything, and being like, oh my gosh, this is what we've created. It's like we've created.
Yeah, I think especially, you know, depending on what kind of level of company you work for, you know, if you work for like the Adidas, the Nikes, you know, they have very strict protocol in place to prevent this. But, you know, when you start talking about the lower end and the faster fashion, you know, you have to start asking yourself, you know, why are things a much lower price? And that is because there is, you know, a human toll, an environmental toll. So I think it's this level of consideration, you know, on the whole process. Also, you know, things like working with factories closer to home. You know, if you work within Europe, you know, if you have a manufacturing base in Portugal or Turkey, you know, they automatically have much stricter regulations because they're within the European Union. But also from an emission standpoint, you know, this idea of production to point of sale, thinking about these things, you know, can, you know, obviously massively reduce the impact, but also kind of give it a USP. If you create a product, you know, in the North America and you say it's made in the USA, it automatically has a reason to buy additional to the fabric and the, you know, the graphic detail.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I mean, there's some people, even just from interviewing, you know, people from my website and, you know, with Fashion in the Free, a lot of these people started their own businesses and they're ethical, they're sustainable, and, you know, they do things like using dead stock fabric. And I've actually been really inspired by some of the smaller brands, the smaller companies that have really been at the forefront of this movement in general. And they seem to be the ones that, you know, really finding out ways to do this properly with less of a negative impact on the planet. So, you know, using dead stock fabric, which is fabric that basically has already been used from, it's basically waste fabric from other companies. So really you're not ordering any new fabric, you're not having anything made, and you're using that waste to make something else that someone else can enjoy and can love. And then other things is just rethinking the fashion calendar in itself. You know, I know there's been so much talk of that this year. I mean, how many companies actually do it remains to be seen. But, you know, you've got companies that are churning out a collection every few weeks. And there's a lot of people that basically put collections out at times of the year that just don't make sense anymore. So you'll have like summer collections that go out into spring collections that go out in December and things like that. And I think people really like should be using this year as a time of reflection to figure out, you know, what does their fashion calendar look like? Are they working in a smart way? How much inventory were they potentially left with this year after everything happened? Because that's why we've seen the collapse of so many companies this year, is because they weren't thinking that way. They weren't thinking smart, and they were just constantly chasing their tails and not really thinking, how can we, you know, strip that back and think smart and produce in a smarter way. So
yeah. I think one of the things that, you know, I've kind of found in my career, which brought a lot more success, you have a lot of companies that, you know, talk about trends. You have a lot of these, you know, WGSN and things like this, and it kind of becomes this cycle. You know, you produce what they class as newness, you know, to sell more clothes, and it's this cycle and cycle. And I think actually what you do, you know, depending on what level you kind of performing at, you know, maybe this works more for fast fashion. But as a brand, you should really not be doing this. You should kind of be creating graphics which is true to your kind of heritage, which is kind of very much linked to storytelling, authentic storytelling, come up with concepts, really invest in creating ideas which can live for a long period of time. You see a lot of brands like Nautica and Helly Hansen, you could buy something, or Ralph Lauren, which is maybe 25, 30 years old, and it could still be on the shop floor today. That's because these kind of styles they're doing are very kind of classic and timeless, but they're also kind of spending more time investing in storytelling instead of kind of fast fashion trends, which is in essence made to make more and more money and more product.
Yeah, and I think with those trends as well, they're in and out the door, and people might wear them once or twice, and that's the problem as well, is that people feel like they can only be seen in an outfit once or twice again. 'Cause, I mean, that's social media, and that's probably for a whole different topic, but that's also a part of it. And like you said, I think you said about it being timeless, but also just good quality as well. I feel like the quality has gone way down over the last few years, because people are trying to churn out £3 dresses and things like that. And you've got this idea of disposable fashion that really needs to shift. And if they, even if a company is not willing to commit to, taking out, key trends, or taking out, I don't know, different, several collections in the year, they at least need to think about, okay, well, maybe we need to be increasing the quality, bumping up the price a little, so that these are have a bit more longevity. They're not just thought of as disposable.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes to they're in one sense always trying to satisfy the consumer, and I think the consumer has to understand that the true cost of fashion, everything, from a raw material which is grown to it's transported to its, there's so many cycles along the way, and it's definitely true that quality, is much more important than quantity. And I think you start to see this kind of, a lot of brands are switching onto it now. You Patagonia with Wornwear. You have a lot of denim brands, kind of going out there and offering to fix your jeans and your denim if it's kind of broken. I think there's a huge awakening in one sense of kind of more brands, seeing that, people want to buy quality and, not kind of trend pieces.
Yeah, and I do love the idea. I mean, I've seen Selfridges and all these other companies doing this kind of thing where they're offering a mending service and all of that. And I think with things like that, I think it's great, because you might have pieces of clothing that you absolutely adore, but it might have a tear in it, and people then just oh, we're just going to throw it away. But there's other ways of preserving that and keeping that, because people do have this almost relationship with their clothing. You might have something that really reminds you of an event you went to, or some great time in your life, and people like to hold on to that. So I do love
and I think as well, obviously, by fixing things, it then becomes more custom, it becomes more unique to you, and like you say, it's more of a story, and it has more sentimental value instead of just a piece of clothing, or something you don't really have value for.
Yeah, totally. So I'm going to move on to our next question. I would love to know, or I'm sure everyone else would love to know, a little bit more about your company, DUCO, and what services you offer, and what steps you took to become fully sustainable.
Yeah.
Which I say responsible.
So my company, DUCO, so it's kind of 9 months old now, and the idea of creating this was, I kind of realized in my time in Adidas and Puma that my work could make more of a difference. Not to sound egotistical, but a lot of the work that I would produce for these companies, would have, great success, but that kind of started to make me realize that actually there was a negative side of it. And although it was making this huge financial revenue, that actually, one, I was not benefiting from this revenue. It was kind of going to shareholders, and there was kind of no positive, or very little positive environmental impact from that. So I kind of wanted to create a model which would, one, first of all, work to kind of deliver better designs, kind of create a business model which would be based on, fundamental morals, good business, trust, hard work, and then kind of to use my kind of position and contacts to kind of then provide different services. So, if we can see an opportunity and connect those through collaboration, and then use a certain percentage of the profit. So 15% of the profits go directly into kind of a tree planting charity in Scotland. And it's this idea of kind of trying to create a circular idea that, with success and good relationships, you can also achieve, one, financial success, but also a very positive environmental standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. Before I go on to our last question, if anyone has any questions for either myself or Jack, now's the time to kind of put it in the chat. We're going to answer everything at the end. So yeah, we're going to be doing that after this question. So if you have anything to ask, please ask away now, just in the chat button at the bottom. So lastly, my question for you, Jack, is what are your thoughts about the future of fashion? You know, from everything that's been going on in the world this year, I think definitely there's going to be a shift. And I guess from, you know, what you've probably been working on and just your opinion on where you see things shifting, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I think, you know, there is an awful lot of change coming. I think faster than ever. You know, it's not necessarily just in the fashion industry. You see it a lot in the automotive industry, maybe not so US specific, but in kind of Europe and Scandinavia. You know, a lot of the car companies are now saying, you know, in the next 2 or 3 years, you will only be allowed to buy hybrid or electric vehicles. And I think a lot of fashion brands are kind of switching to this idea. So it's more focused on, you know, creating better quality, providing services where they will fix your clothes, be seen to kind of be more open and transparent about the operations, you know, so whether, you know, their impact and kind of assessing their impact and how they can improve. You'll also start to see, I think, a lot of fashion brands look to partner with different charities, you know, whether it was Adidas and Parley a few years back, you know, they were really the ones to pioneer this, but now there's a lot of companies looking at, you know, their field of play. So if you're a, you know, a mountaineering brand, you might be looking at more nature charities and how they can start to use their influence to kind of positively affect things. But I also think, you know, different services, I think there's so much different things out there. You know, you look at companies now exploring renting clothes, and, you know, it's similar to, you know, how you rent a handbag and, you know, use it for a few times and then send it back. And it's this idea that it will be used by multiple people. But I definitely feel that there's a huge shift. You know, there's always going to be this, I think for now, this fast fashion, and it's trying to educate these companies to actually see it as an opportunity, but it kind of needs a lot more policy, a lot more kind of, you know, people speaking out against it. You know, you probably see Patagonia's recent statements. You know, brands are becoming much more political, especially around the climate. You know, they spoke about, you know, getting rid of Trump and things like this. So brands are starting to understand the, you know, potential, you know, with their consumer bases, and understand how to use their influence to kind of create change and faster.
Yeah, definitely. I think I really hope after this year, with everyone having that chance to pause, that things are going to change. It's hard to know like what everyone's move would be. I feel like we started to see it a lot already, even just with, you know, representation of like diversity within companies. I do think there's a lot of people making those steps. I do think there's, you know, so many things that have come out in the news recently about ethical practices, and I do think there's seems to be, I don't want to call it cancel culture, but it is that thing where people are calling people out now if, you know, they're not. I think people being a little bit braver to call people out, and they've had the time to really process what companies have been getting up to that may be a little bit negative this year.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, it's definitely the age of information. You know, maybe people would argue maybe even too much information, but you can, you know, you can really track things out. You can really kind of dig, you know, into things. And I think that's also why it's important for brands to, instead of, you know, trying to greenwash and say that this is, you know, good for the environment, it's more this journey, you know, we're working towards it. And I think, you know, this idea of building community to positively affect change, you know, I think that is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. So I just had a look. I haven't actually got any questions this time around. Maybe you managed to cover everything everyone wanted to know. So I've basically put a couple of links in the chat there for everyone. One is Jack's website, the DUCO.com. And then the other is the fashion and the free article he did with us back in June. So if anyone wants to read those afterwards, that's going to be there. And then there's also going to be a recording of this that we're going to put on YouTube and on the website as well. So if anyone wants to listen again, that will be there. But yeah, I guess since we haven't got any questions today, then I'll just be wrapping this up. So thank you so much to everybody that joined us today. Thank you so much for Jack for taking his time to share his story and his knowledge in sustainable fashion. As I mentioned, his website is in the chat there, so if anyone wants to check that out afterwards, it's there. And all the links will also be added to the recording when I put that up. And if you enjoyed our webinar today, we'd really appreciate you share your feedback with us and share the video link once the recording is posted, in case anyone you know that might be interested in watching. So yeah, thank you so much, Jack, and thank you so much everybody who tuned in.
Yeah, and I think if anyone has any questions at a later date or wants to reach out, I connect with a lot of people, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation and try and build relationships and moving forward. I wish everyone a nice day wherever you are.
All right, cool. Thank you everybody for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, guys. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.